Welcome to the Savage Executive Podcast. I'm your host, Steve Smith, and whether you're running a company, leading a department, or building your first team, this is where faith-driven leaders come to sharpen. This is wisdom for the weight that you carry. So let's get into it. There is a conversation that you have been avoiding. You know exactly which one I mean. You have been building the case for why it is not the right time. You have told yourself the situation will work itself out. You have reframed your avoidance as patience, as grace, as strategic timing. It has been none of those things. It has been fear. And here is what that avoidance has cost you, whether you have tracked it or not. The person whose performance that you have not addressed has been subtly setting the standard for everyone around them. The team dynamic that you have not corrected has been quietly teaching every team member what is acceptable here. The relationship that needs a hard conversation has been slowly calcifying into distance, resentment, or polite disconnection. Avoidance is not neutral. Every week that you delay a necessary conversation, the gap widens, the stakes increase, and the courage required to have it goes up. You are not giving the situation time to improve. You are actually giving it time to worsen. And the cost of the eventual reckoning compounds in proportion to how long you have waited. Here's the other thing about avoidance that we don't talk about enough. It communicates. See, your silence is not invisible to the person that you're not confronting, or even to the team watching to see what you will do. Silence communicates either that you have not noticed the problem, which damages your credibility, or that you have noticed it and are unwilling to address it, which damages the culture. The courage to confront is one of the most underdeveloped leadership skills in faith-driven organizations. Today, I want to give you a framework for having the hard conversation well, specifically, directly, and in a way that is genuinely an act of care rather than an act of aggression. The model that I'm walking you through today is built on one premise. Confrontation, done well, is an act of multiplication. You are not tearing down, you are building up. You are investing in the person, the team, and the mission by refusing to let dysfunction continue unchecked. Avoidance shrinks capacity. Confrontation, done with care and clarity, expands it. So let's start. The first thing that you do is clarify your intent before you open your mouth. The most common reason confrontations go badly is that the leader starts talking before they have clarified, honestly, internally, why they are having the conversation. If your intent is to vent frustration or to assert dominance or to protect yourself from being associated with failure, the conversation will go badly. Those intentions leak through tone and word choice in ways that are impossible to fully mask. The person across the table can feel the difference between being managed and being invested in. The right intent for a confrontational conversation is development. Your goal is to close the gap between where this person or the situation is and where it needs to be, and doing it in a way that produces growth rather than damage. So before you walk into the room, ask yourself, what do I want to be true at the end of this conversation that is not true right now? Am I going in to win or to build? When your intent is genuinely development, the conversation feels different to everyone in it. The questions that you ask open up rather than close down. The tone invites rather than intimidates. The outcome is more likely to be change because change comes from people who feel invested in, not people who feel prosecuted. So the second thing is speak to behavior, not character. The fastest way to destroy a confrontational conversation is to make it about identity rather than action. You are careless. That closes the person down. This report had 3 significant errors, and that pattern has appeared in the last 2 months, opens a problem that can be solved. Behavior is observable, specific, and changeable. Character is a judgment, a label, and deeply threatening to receive. When you speak to behavior, you give the person something to work with. When you speak to character, you give them something to defend. And a person in defensive posture is not learning. They are surviving. The conversation that triggers defensiveness produces compliance at best and resentment at worst. The conversation that stays behavioral keeps the door open to genuine change. This principle applies in ministry context with even more force. The faith-driven leader is particularly tempted to spiritualize confrontation, to frame poor performance as a spiritual deficiency, to suggest that the problem is a heart issue before the evidence warrants that conclusion. Resist that temptation. Address the behavior. Let God address the heart. Part 3. Be specific and recent. Vague confrontations produce vague results. You have been difficult to work with lately. Leaves the person wondering what you mean, guessing at examples, and defending against a cloud. In Tuesday's meeting, you interrupted the operating director 3 times and dismissed her data without engaging with it. Gives them something concrete to respond to. The more specific your evidence, the more seriously the conversation will be received. And the more recent the example, the more relevant it feels. A confrontation built on a pattern of recent, specific behaviors is far more credible and far more actionable than one built on vague impressions accumulated over time. Specificity communicates that you have been paying attention, and leaders who have been paying attention earn the right to be heard. Keep a brief record. It's not surveillance, it's leadership. When you observe a behavior that concerns you, note it. Date, context, what happened, what the impact was. When the confrontational conversation comes, you are not working from memory and impression. You are working from documentation. That is the difference between accusation and accountability. You notice how this is progressing through here? Part 4 is inviting a response before prescribing a solution. One of the most important moves in a confrontational conversation is the pause. The deliberate invitation to the other person to respond before you prescribe the solution. Most leaders front load the conversation with their analysis, conclusions, and expectations, and then ask if there are any questions. That is a monologue, not a conversation, and monologues do not produce ownership. After you have stated the observable behavior and its impact, stop. Ask, what is your perspective on this? What has been happening from your side? And then genuinely listen. Not to be polite, not to check the box of having asked, but because you might be missing context. Because the person may have information that changes your analysis. Because treating them as a partner in problem solving rather than a recipient of judgment produces dramatically different outcomes. The conversation that ends with the person articulating their own commitment to change in their own words is categorically more effective than the one that ends with you explaining what they need to do differently. Ownership produces change. Compliance produces compliance. Only one of those is multiplication. Then that leads you to part 5. Close with commitment and follow through. A confrontational conversation without a clear mutual commitment at the end is not a confrontation, it is a complaint. You have to close the loop. What specifically is going to change? By when? How will you both know? What support or resources does the person need to make the change? When will you check in? These questions transform a difficult conversation into a development plan. And then follow through. Actually check in. Actually hold the accountability. Actually celebrate improvement when it comes. The follow through communicates that the conversation was real, that you meant it, that you invested in it, and that you are going to continue to be present in the person's growth. That is what turns confrontation into multiplication. Over the years, I've coached leaders inside organizations. I've led leaders from other ministries, business owners, and executives across a variety of industries. And I've noticed something interesting. The issue is almost never that they don't know what needs to happen. Most of the time, they know exactly what needs to happen. They know who needs to be confronted. They know which standard isn't being met. They know which relationship is strained. They know which behavior is damaging the culture. The problem isn't clarity. The problem is courage. I can think of leader after leader who came into a coaching conversation carrying the same burden. They would spend 30 minutes explaining a situation that I could summarize in one sentence. There's a conversation that you're avoiding. And almost every time they had a reason. I don't want to hurt them. I don't want them to quit. They're a good person. We've been friends for a long time. This isn't the right season. I just need a little bit more information. The details changed, but the pattern never did. And here's what I've learned. The conversation never gets easier because you wait. It actually gets harder. The employee becomes more frustrated. The team becomes more aware. The culture becomes more confused. The leader becomes more anxious. And what started as a simple correction slowly grows into a major problem. In fact, I can't think of a single coaching situation where avoiding the conversation actually improved the outcome. Not one. But I can think of dozens where having the conversation did. The interesting part is that when leaders finally have the discussion, they almost always come back with the same reaction. That wasn't nearly as bad as I thought it would be. The person wasn't surprised. The relationship didn't implode. The organization didn't collapse. Most of the time, the other person already knew that something was wrong. What they needed was clarity. What they needed was leadership. What they needed was someone who cared enough to tell them the truth. I've watched strained relationships heal because of one honest conversation. I've watched underperforming employees become strong contributors because someone finally addressed the issue directly. I've watched teams regain trust because leaders stopped hoping problems would disappear and started leading them. And every time I'm reminded of the same lesson. The pain of the conversation is almost always smaller than the pain of avoiding it. The leaders who grow are not the leaders who enjoy confrontation. They're the leaders who understand that caring for people sometimes requires uncomfortable conversations. Avoidance feels compassionate in the moment, but clarity is usually the more loving choice. That is the hidden cost of the conversation that you are not having. You are not protecting anyone. You are deferring a cost that is compounding every single week. I want to say one more thing specifically about confrontation in family business or small team ministry contexts. Because the relational stakes feel categorically different when the person you need to confront is also your brother-in-law or your longtime friend or someone who helped found the organization with you. The framework still applies. In fact, it applies with even more precision. Because the longer the relationship, the more important it is to speak to behavior rather than character, to use specific examples rather than patterns, and to enter with development intent rather than accumulated frustration. Long relationships do not exempt people from accountability. They raise the bar for how carefully and lovingly accountability is delivered. In ministry contexts, the courage to confront is directly connected to the discipleship model. Jesus confronted people that he loved. Peter, the rich young ruler, the disciples arguing about who was the greatest. Each confrontation was specific, direct, and aimed at the other person's growth. None of them were comfortable. All of them were necessary. The faith-driven leader who avoids confrontation out of a desire to be liked, to preserve harmony, or to avoid conflict is not operating from grace. They are operating from self-protection. And the irony is that the relationship that they think they are protecting is actually being harmed by the silence. Because relationships built on avoided truths are built on a foundation of fiction. Confrontation, done in truth and love, is an act of discipleship. It says, I see you clearly enough to tell you what I see, and I care about you enough to say it to your face. That's not aggression, it's an investment. And investment is the engine of multiplication. So here's the savage takeaway for the day. The conversation that you are avoiding is not a threat to a relationship. It is an investment in it. What we just unpacked is the discipline of multiplication, one of the 5 disciplines inside the Savage Advantage playbook. Leaders who multiply invest in the growth of the people around them, even when that investment requires the courage to say hard things. Confrontation, done with care and clarity, is one of the highest leverage acts of multiplication available to a leader. Have the conversation. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 15 talks about speaking the truth in love. It may grow up into him in all things, which is the head, even Christ. See, speaking the truth in love, both halves are required. Truth without love is aggression. Love without truth is negligence. The combination, honest, caring, direct communication, is the standard that Scripture sets for how we invest in the people around us. And the purpose is growth. May grow up into him in all things. The confrontational conversation, done with truth and love, produces maturity. It moves the person from where they are toward where they need to be. That is not just a management technique. It is a discipleship model applied to organizational life. And it is available to every leader willing to pay the price of courage. Faith-driven leaders, you have access to a framework for confrontation that is more powerful than any business methodology. Truth delivered in genuine love for the purpose of the other person's growth. The people that you lead deserve it. This week's action item: identify the conversation that you have been avoiding for more than 30 days. This week, you are going to schedule it. Block the time. Prepare 2 or 3 specific behavioral examples using the framework from today. Send the calendar invite before the end of the day today. The scheduling is honestly the hardest part. Once it's on the calendar, the preparation will follow. And here's the diagnostic question from the Savage Advantage playbook for this discipline. If you stepped away for 30 days, what would stop and what would scale? Take that question seriously this week. Write your answer down. It will tell you more about the health of your organization than most business coaching opportunities ever will. The Savage Advantage playbook is available free at savageexecutive.com. It's 5 disciplines with real diagnostics and a 30-day path to put the framework to work. It is the foundation of everything that we teach here at Savage Executive. Download your copy at savageexecutive.com. And if this episode sharpened your thinking, share it with a leader who needs it this week. Subscribe so you never miss an episode. And connect with me on LinkedIn or Savage Executive on Instagram. Next week, the art of the pivot. Because the best leaders are not the ones who never change directions. They're the ones who pivot before they have to. That's next week. This is the Savage Executive. I'm Steve Smith. Lead with excellence, steward with faithfulness, and carry the weight with grace.